we like to dig out a couple of war criminals from time to time. Here's Henry Kissinger, right? So he used to be the national security advisor at one point, and then the U.S. Secretary of State, and he just made a controversial statement right now, and the whole world is really angry at him. The Ukrainian president Zelensky's angry at him, and Henry Kissinger is famous for being a despicable war criminal, and also for being a believer in Realpolitik.
Russia towards Europe, and of Ukraine towards Europe. Ideally, the dividing line should return to the status quo ante. I believe pursuing the war beyond that point would turn it into a war not about the freedom of Ukraine, which has been undertaken with great cohesion by NATO, but into a war against Russia itself. And so this seems to me to be the dividing line, that it is just and possible to define, and it will be difficult.
Dividing lines should return to the status quo ante. So not status quo now, but the previous status quo. What does he mean by that? Well, let's take a look at the map of Ukraine right now. And what he's saying basically is that Russia should, keep Crimea, the Donbass. They should also keep it. And, this is, for the Ukrainians, this is outrageous. I understand Ukrainians. I understand it. I don't like it when Israel takes the Golan Heights, for example. But, Israel is actually like a colonizer. Ironically, a lot of Israelis are Ukrainians. But in any case, my point is that I understand their outrage at this prospect. And basically, that is what he is suggesting. The reaction from Zelensky to what he just said, right?
Глибокого минулого виринає, наприклад, пан Кісінджер і говорить, що нібито треба віддати Росії шматок України, щоб нібито не було відчуження Росії від Європи. Таке враження, що у пана Кісінджера на календарі не 2022 рік, а 1938. І він думав, що говорить з аудиторією не в Давосі, а в тодішньому Мюнхені. І за всіма цими геополітичними міркуваннями тих, хто радить Україні щось віддати Росії, великі геополітики завжди не хочуть бачити звичайних людей, звичайних українців. Мільйони тих, хто, власне, і живе на території, яку вони пропонують обміняти на ілюзію миру. Треба завжди бачити людей і пам'ятати, що цінності – це не просто слово.
Right, obviously he doesn't like that. They want to keep Donbass and Crimea and so on. And, when we talk about Henry Kissinger and Realpolitik, basically it means you don't conduct foreign policy based on what you believe in, or, based on morality or based on conviction, but rather about, what you can do in this situation. So, for example, you have to just, cut your losses and proceed with this plan. And he's basically telling the Ukrainians that, listen, the best thing to do is just let the Russians have this and stop now before it gets worse. That's what he's saying. And, of course, they're outraged because, this guy, Blinken, right? The same job. So Henry Kissinger used to be the Secretary of State. If he said that as Secretary of State, and this was back then, I think it would have maybe people would have digested it a bit differently. But he doesn't fit in with the kind of politics right now that are being, shoved down our throats. Here in the Washington Post, they said Kissinger says Ukraine should cede territory to Russia to end war. So former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger said Ukraine should cede territory to Russia to help end the invasion, suggesting a position that a vast majority of Ukrainians are against as the war enters its fourth month. Speaking at a conference at the, pay attention, the World Economic Forum, very big, in Davos, Switzerland, Kissinger urged the US and the West to not seek an embarrassing defeat for Russia and Ukraine, warning it could worsen Europe's long-term stability. After saying that Western countries should remember Russia's importance to Europe and not get swept up in the mood of the moment, Kissinger also pushed for the West to force Ukraine into accepting negotiations with the status quo ante, which means the previous state of affairs. Negotiations need to begin in the next 2 months before it creates upheavals and tensions that will not be easily overcome. Ideally, the dividing line should be a return to the status quo ante, said Kissinger. Pursuing the war beyond that point would not be about the freedom of Ukraine, but a new war against Russia itself. He gets it, right? It's already in the stage. It is a war against Russia. It always has been. When it comes to real, armed struggle and fighting for national liberation, like the Palestinians are doing, they call them terrorists, right? So they don't actually believe in these things. They just they make a mockery out of it, paint it as some sort of moral crusade. But at the end of the day, the United States used Ukraine to poke Russia. They used the Ukrainians, and now the Ukrainians are suffering. This is the problem. So to say that there might be a new war against Russia, it's already there, man. It's already there. What you call it when they're helping them to kill generals, then bragging about it? Come on. The status quo ante mentioned by Kissinger, who was Secretary of State to Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, refers to restoring a situation in which Russia formally controlled Crimea and informally controlled Ukraine's two easternmost regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. So, in the Donbass region. Ukrainian President Zelensky has emphasized that part of his conditions for entering peace talks with Russia would include a restoration of pre-invasion borders. Basically, Kissinger's out of line. We get it. We get it. He's too old-fashioned. Kissinger is a war criminal and a really nasty individual. But he understood the balance of power. For those guys from that era who were literally fighting the Cold War, in the Cold War, they understand balance of power. That if you go too far, it's irredeemable. It's going to be a big problem. They understand this. And, people like Blinken, who looks like some high schooler trying to put on a suit, they just don't get it. They think it's a game. They think they can get away with everything. I like these things that they're saying here that Putin paid Kissinger to say that. Wow, that's a fucking great one, really. Look at this. Look at this diarrhea. Quote, Kissinger is one of Kissinger is one of the world's most highly paid political consultants. If he says that Ukraine must give Russia, Putin, apparently it's Putin. It's Putin's country, right? The immediate question is, how much did Putin pay him for that, and how? 98 years old, soon 99, and still fighting for the last dollars. How's that? I mean, this person is really an embarrassment to themselves. They're really ridiculous. Entire tweet is just absolute drivel. Here we have more of this. Kissinger is a longtime admirer of Putin and vice versa. So him urging to feed the crocodile some more Ukraine is not surprising at all. Oh boy. I don't even know what to say, man. I mean, this is so childish. It's so childish, really so childish. And you got people posting pictures of him meeting Putin. What does that even mean? You can find a politician meeting another politician. You can find a million photos of that. It doesn't really mean anything. I think Henry Kissinger understands the balance of power, but he's really a nasty person. I mean, you should go read the trial of Henry Kissinger. You have to understand, like, the United States, they weren't just in Vietnam. There's also all sorts of other things going around in the background. And Kissinger helped orchestrate, or was at the very least involved in them. He's a German, by the way. You know that? Very interesting. Like he's an immigrant. and he managed to become the Secretary of State for 2 presidents. We've reached a position, we are in a situation where Henry Kissinger sounds more reasonable than the mainstream media and the politicians. Like, what the fuck? Now, again, I understand Ukrainians. They're like, this is their country. Why should they cede an inch? I understand this. I get it, really. It's like with Syria. This is Syria. Why should Syria give an inch to the Israelis? Fuck off. I'm not saying the Russians are like the Israelis. Put yourself in their shoes, the Ukrainians, in this matter, in terms of geography and territorial integrity. I get it. Either way, that's not the point. The point that Kissinger's trying to make here is that there has to be a settlement, peace talks. Do you understand? And we're in a situation when they don't want peace talks. They're just sending more weapons. They're prolonging the conflict because they want the war to continue. They don't want it to end. When you want a war to end, go and talk. You have diplomacy. You don't send $40 billion of, $20 billion worth of weapons and another $20 billion in assistance. I lost count, honestly. I've lost count. It's literally just tens of billions of dollars. Who has this money? People in America don't even have fucking baby food. People in the United States do not even have baby formula. Meanwhile, their government is sending tens of billions of dollars to make sure that Russia continues this war. And I think it's disgusting because they're using the Ukrainians, and I cannot believe that Henry Kissinger, in one aspect, the aspect of you have to reach a settlement, sounds more reasonable than them. We are in a Twilight Zone episode. really in a Twilight Zone episode. They don't want diplomacy. Kissinger, as disgusting as he is, he understands balance of power. Russia has nukes. If it goes too far, they will use the nukes. And you must read Russia's policy on nuclear weapons. Russia published its policy on, basically stating in which situation will we use a nuclear weapon. The Americans have hid theirs, right? There's a secret, apparently. The Russians are transparent with this, and one of the things they said, if there's a threat to the country's leadership with conventional weapons, right? So not even nuclear weapons, they will use the nukes. I'll actually get them for you right here. It's interesting to study these things. It's interesting to look at them. When we talk about Iraq and the files that were dropped by WikiLeaks, were the rules of engagement. Rules of engagement means it's like for the soldiers, it's like a guide. Like, when should you do this? When should you do that? When should you use lethal force? So on, right? The Americans hide their policies for some reason. Why? Why would you hide that if you're doing good things and you have nothing to hide? So the Russian Federation retains the right to use nuclear weapons in response to the use of nuclear weapons and other types of weapons of mass destruction. So that basically means biological and chemical. And then it also retains the right in the case of aggression against the Russian Federation with the use of conventional weapons when the very existence of the state is put under threat. Conventional weapons means normal weapons. I'm not going to say a pistol in this case, but yeah, okay, whatever. Like, tanks, artillery, and so on. So even if it's not nuclear, if they go too far, my point is, if they go too far, it's going to be a problem. And I'm not saying that the Ukrainians are going to reach Moscow into the Kremlin, but there are other ways. There are other ways that you can bring down the state without having to go to the capital. It could be either with the resources, infrastructure, and so on, right? So my point is, they're playing with fire. For the love of God, I wish they would stop. I hate this so much. I want, really, I'm not even Ukrainian, and I feel bad for them because this is ridiculous, and it's disgusting how the Americans use them. They use them like they use the Kurds, and like they use everybody else. It's really disgusting, and all this senseless destruction. I don't understand why. So much violence, man. It's too much to take in. Every single day they say, "Oh, Israel killed a Palestinian." Oh, Ukraine. Now the number of refugees is 6 million. Every single day there's something horrible happening. The shooting in a school. Come on, man. even if you don't like Russia, you must respect and understand that there can be consequences, and those consequences are not a game. And I think it's really ignorant that they are continuing with this, because it doesn't take that much to trigger a false alarm. It doesn't take that much to provoke something that we cannot reverse. I really dislike Henry Kissinger and no respect for him, but it's kind of ironic that in the sense of you need to sit down and make a settlement, he is more reasonable than the politicians right now. Again, we are living in a Twilight Zone episode.